If you're a musician who's ever felt paralyzed by fear and you've allowed that to stop you from stepping into your full potential, this episode is for you. I want to give you an opportunity to have a new relationship with fear and to be able to use it as a catalyst for growth instead of a sign of self sabotage. In today's episode, I'm going to outline the key strategies on how you can use a different relationship with fear as a way to accelerate your business growth instead of stalling it. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Musicians Creating Prosperity podcast. I'm Fabiana Claure, your host, and I'm excited to talk today about how you can use fear as a catalyst for growth instead of allowing it to stop you from reaching your full potential. When it comes to building your business as a musician, entrepreneur, or creative, I have seen time and time again how when you feel fear, you can stop yourself from making important decisions in your life simply because you interpret fear as a sign that you must retreat, that you must stop. And I have felt this myself in many instances of my life where my desire for, in a way, protection and self preservation has inadvertently created a sabotaging effect in my career. And I've seen this happen time and time again with the musicians that I work with on a daily basis. And so I want to bring you this episode to help you perhaps create a new relationship with fear. Because I believe at the end of the day, it's the way you interpret that emotion that can become a make or break for your success. In other words, if you are able to understand how to interpret that emotion of feeling fear, and you're able to take a step out of that feeling and really step into a place of strategic thinking and letting the emotion to the side and interpreting what fear is actually telling you. You see, fear is typically a sign that you are stretching yourself out of your comfort zone. And biologically, we are wired to protect ourselves, to stay in our lane, to stay in our comfort zone, because it's just a natural instinct of survival, of self preservation. And I think many times when it comes to being artists, being musicians, we're used to fear. Like we have to muster the courage to stand on stage, to perform in front of a live audience. We have to constantly be learning new skills, adapting to different environments as it relates to new repertoire, as it relates to even learning new ways of teaching when we work with students. There's always an element of creating something different, something out of your comfort zone. And yet, as musicians, we're able to adapt, I think, to fear and get used to it because we accept it as part of growth, right? We know that if we're practicing on hours and hours and hours in the practice room, we will eventually need to get to the stage and stand in front of an audience and perform. Like we know that's inevitable. So even though we feel fear standing on stage, we don't allow that fear to paralyze us and to not get on stage. Although I'm not undermining performance anxiety and what it takes to actually get on stage, but at the end of the day, most musicians, when we have to actually complete the process of learning a piece of music and bringing it to the audience, we will have to create that relationship with fear in a way that doesn't paralyze us. Otherwise, we would never be able to stand on stage. We would never be able to share, right? So I want to encourage you to take that same experience that you've developed with fear from being live and being on stage and presenting your art to the world and translate the skills that you've learned from being on stage to being in your business. Because I believe when it comes to building a business, the same things apply. We prepare things, we work on things, and eventually we have to present things or make changes, perhaps introduce a new model to the people that are around us, reinvent our own brand, stand in front of our environment, our community, our audience, and position ourselves differently. And inevitably, fear will be a part of that process. And when you are able to develop a relationship with fear, one that doesn't only acknowledge it, but also does not allow it to stop you from taking action, then your life will change completely. And I want to bring this conversation because I really have seen in so many instances when I've wanted to make a change in my life and I've thought about, not making the change and thinking about, protecting myself from making the changes. And then I've regretted not taking the actions. I've regretted not taking the leap of faith. I've regretted kind of protecting myself because I've realized that that sense of self preservation had become a sense of basically sabotaging in a way, self sabotage. And I know for the longest time, when it came to building a brand online and positioning myself and really sharing the content that I had been creating, and more of my personal side, more of my vulnerability, I felt this conditioned desire to stay very, very private and to just kind of keep everything for myself. And even when it came to bringing my family into the business and the brand, and just like the stories that I share about me and parenting and kids, and the business and everything that I do as a person, a human being, beyond what I do as an artist, I feel, and as a strategist, I feel like I had to really put myself in this element of service. And what I was able to do was really understand that ultimately, the more that I'm willing to open myself up and be vulnerable and share about my journey, share about the journey that I've gone in my own evolution, growing, building, and scaling, two businesses, one brick and mortar, then my online business, letting go of my university position, all the things that have been kind of part of my story. The more open that I was about each of these stages, the more I would be able to spread the message around what's possible for others. So in a way, I had to get myself out of this egoic perception of like making it about me. And instead, I had to focus on making this about ultimately who are the people I want to share this message and why. Why is it important to be able to bring this information to the market, to my audience, to my community, because I know that it can change lives. I know that's ultimately going to help people connect more deeply with me and ultimately be able to make changes in their lives, make changes in their businesses, be bold, be courageous, and be willing to reinvent themselves just like I did. I remember when I just quit my job in 2021, which was one of the biggest, like, really leaps of faith that I had to do when I decided to step out of the full time tenure track position. I remember many of my clients at the time who were working with me online started to take their own courageous steps. I remember one of our clients, Ashley, she said, I'm now, stepping out, and I asked for a raise in the job that I was in, and I got it. And it wasn't just a small raise, it was like 30% raise. I remember thinking, wow, that's so inspiring. She just found a new way of valuing herself, and she found the courage where perhaps before she would have never done it. Right. And so it creates this ripple effect of you being able to make an impact in the lives of others as long as you're willing to overcome your own fears. And this is an example in the case of just kind of becoming more visible, bringing more of myself to the online space, being willing to open myself up. But there have been many other instances where I have felt the fear, but I knew that unless I was willing to move past it, that I was always going to stay in a certain level of growth. Like when I decided to quit my job, I definitely felt a lot of fear and uncertainty, because although my coaching program had been very successful in the first 6 months leading up to kind of like launching it, within a few months, I started making some shifts, some improvements, some changes, adaptations. I raised my rates, and really at the time that I um, decided to leave my job, I didn't have a financially thriving business, something that would give me this full sense of security that everything would be okay. I really had to create a relationship with this fear that I was feeling, to know that unless I was willing to move past that and to go all in my online business, that I was always going to feel this tension and this sacrifice in my quality of life, that I was just spreading myself too thin, and all of the things that were being sacrificed at that time, my health, my relationships, my focus, my artistry, all the things that I was feeling were being held back because of the multiple places I was in, because of the many things I was carrying on my plate. And in a way, that fear kept me from taking that step for, about a year, I would say. I started my program, and I didn't really let go of my job until a year after. And it wasn't until I really had to take a step back and interpret, what is this fear telling me? What is this fear that I feel every time I think about quitting my job? What is this telling me? And it was telling me, stay in your lane, stay safe. And I realized that voice was no longer serving me. And I needed to change the narrative and change that relationship with fear, and be able to reframe that and say, what if I interpret this fear that I'm having as a sign that I'm in a moment of growth, that I'm about to pivot into something different, that I'm about to make a shift that will change the course of my life forever, and that will be a catalyst for growth instead of a reason for me to stay in my lane. And it was only in that moment when I was able to change my story in my mind around what I was feeling. Because again, the fear was still there. I don't want to undermine that, like, people feel fear. Yes, the fear is real. But what you can control is how you interpret that feel. And my episode, the reason I chose this episode today is because I want to help you perhaps reconsider, how are you calling yourself fear? Like, what are you doing when you feel fear? How are you interpreting fear? And are you right now letting fear become a source of self sabotage with the excuse that it's preservation? What if it's not preservation? What if it's just sabotage? And how could you change that relationship with the fear that you may have? I see this happen time and time again when it comes to reinventing your music business. So many of the musicians that I work with uh, are in a stage of growth and evolution when they come into my programs, and they feel this fear about how their immediate environment will react, how they're going to interpret their new branding positioning, their new designed offers. Many of them go from teaching one-on-one lessons to teaching group lessons. They go from teaching in person to going online. They go from optimizing their online programs and making them more leveraged, where there's more group interaction, but then there's still a lot of one-on-one support, but asynchronously, meaning not needing their time. And all of these shifts start creating a bit of a disruption in their energy and their energetic flow, and they start feeling afraid. And so being able to interpret that fear as like you're changing things. Yes, of course. You have to be aware that that fear will come up because it's trying to protect you. It's trying to keep you where you are. But if you make the decision to interpret that fear and to make decisions based on fear, then you will always be creating a limit for your potential. Why? Because if you stop yourself from doing something important in your life, whether it's starting a new business, whether it's reinventing your existing business, whether it's positioning your brand as a musician entrepreneur in a new and exciting way. Maybe you're going to talk about what you do in a different way than what you've always spoken before. Maybe you're going to position yourself as more than just a piano teacher or a voice teacher or a performer. Maybe you can now position yourself as a combination of different skills that have brought you to this moment in your life, right? That's one of the beautiful things that happens when you start really seeing all of the skills that you have. All of a sudden you don't see yourself in the same lens, and you're ready for other people to see you in a different lens as well. But all of that requires this element of fear and mastery of fear. And the way I like to see this is that you get the choice. You get to decide, how are you going to interpret fear, and what will your relationship be with fear? Because just like you have a relationship with other people in your life, you have a relationship with perhaps time, you have a relationship with finances, you have a relationship with your physical health, your wellness. You have a relationship right now, whether you know it or not. You have a relationship with many, many different, not only people, but also things, right? Elements of your life, forces, if you will. And ultimately, you control how you react to these elements. So many people say, "Oh, I just don't have time for this. I don't have time for that." Or people say, "I can't afford this. I don't have money for this." And in reality, none of those statements are true. It's just the way you relate to time, the way you prioritize your time, the way you put things on your plate is what determines how you manage it. Same thing with finances. The way you prioritize your finances, there will always be funds for whatever you find valuable, period. If you're not finding something valuable, it's so easy to get into this mode of, "Oh, I can't afford this. I don't really want to invest in this," or "I can't, fund this." But I always like to challenge you to always remember that those are always going to be dependent on your priorities. So the same thing happens with fear. If you feel fear in your life and you are looking perhaps at reinventing your music business, which honestly I'm hoping that you are. If you're listening to this podcast, if you're watching the podcast on YouTube, I'm hoping that you're really reconsidering, how are you working right now? Are you working in a way that's strategic? Are you working in a way that is honoring your time? Are you working in a way that is honoring your values, your schedule, your desire for freedom, location, and financial freedom? And if not, then it's time to change, right? And it's time to embrace that fear. It's time to be okay with the fear that may be stopping you right now and be able to interpret that as a sign of growth. And so I want to encourage you to really think about this from a standpoint of, how can you not only welcome the fear, but embrace it as a catalyst for growth. Ultimately, when you can change that narrative around fear, and when you feel it, when you are wanting to make decisions, when you're thinking about maybe changing your studio from private lessons to group lessons, maybe from going from in-person lessons or in-person performances to online experiences, to online events, to online lessons, when you're thinking about potentially speaking about what you do beyond just, I'm a piano teacher, I'm a voice teacher, I'm a performer, I'm a presenter, but also I do all these other things, and you're starting to feel that fear inside of you, I want you to remember this episode. Number one, it starts with your story, the relationship of how you interpret the fear. You can interpret it as something that's going to stop you, or you can interpret it as something that can be a catalyst for growth. That sign that you are at the edge of your comfort zone and you are about to jump into something new and exciting. And unless you are able to move past that fear, you will always stay stuck. Number two, remember that when you're feeling fear, you have to always remember what is the alternative of that fear. How can you look at the alternative? If you don't make that step, if you don't take that step, then what are you comparing that to? Well, what if you stay where you are? What if you keep doing what you're doing? What if you don't have those conversations? What if you don't take that step? What happens to your life if you don't do that thing that you're afraid of? Don't forget that there's an opportunity cost no matter how you look at it, right? If you stay with what you have and you're happy with that, by all means, carry on. But if you think about yourself, your life, your business, your relationships, your artistry, your finances, and the thought of staying where you are right now is not okay, you're not willing to settle for that, you're not willing to tolerate staying where you are or potentially getting in a worse place, because ultimately, when you do the same thing over and over again, erosion will, impede your progress faster than the momentum it creates over time. If you just keep doing the same thing, the same thing, the same thing, that will erode your progress no matter how fast you're going at it, no matter what you're doing. If you're doing the same thing, you will erode your progress. So if you are if you're not okay with staying with what you have, if you're not okay with keeping the challenges that you have right now in your life and your business in any area of what you're doing as a musician, then looking at the potential for change should not be something you're afraid of. In many ways, you may be more afraid of staying where you are than changing. But I think many times when it comes to this relationship with fear, we forget about our current reality. We forget about the cost of inaction. We forget about what it looks like for us to stay the same. We forget about that and we just get too obsessed around change, right? Around, well, what would it take for me to make a difference? What will it take for me to change the things that I'm doing? What will it take for me to maybe have some difficult conversations with those around me? Maybe I need to create better boundaries in my relationships. Maybe I need to speak up more. Maybe I need to, eliminate some things from my life. What will that take? And if you're feeling afraid, then that's a sign that you're growing, not a sign that you need to stop. I want to empower you to change your story, your relationship with fear, starting today. Every single time you feel fear, interpret it as a sign that you are in a stage of growth. You're building momentum. There's an opportunity for you to do something new and different. And all you have to do is change the way you interpret the fear. Change that story. Tell yourself, okay, I'm feeling the fear. How can I use this as a sign for me to keep going, to do what I need to do, and to not interpret this as a sign to stop and to step back? Now, this doesn't mean that you should do things carelessly, by all means. But the idea here is that if you change your relationship with fear, you will be able to go further, faster, and achieve things that you would have never thought possible, simply because you're changing your relationship with fear. I hope this helps you. Let me know what courageous actions you are going to take. And as always, if you want to continue learning about all of these processes, all of these steps, my masterclass is coming up next week. Go to Musicians Profit Masterclass. I look forward to welcoming you into our experience. We host these masterclasses every few months or so. So no matter when you're listening to this episode, always be on the lookout for musiciansprofitmasterclass.com, because this is our flagship 5-day free chance to really work with us in depth around how you can create your music business, reinvent yourself, and find a way to change your mindset, your conditioning, and learn not only this tools and the strategies, but ultimately come out of this experience with a full-fledged master plan to help you reinvent yourself, reinvent your business, and most importantly, reinvent your life. Thank you for listening. Let's prosper together.